Hello everyone, this is Professor Reha, Chief Information Officer of Clan Indigo Oni, here with part 1 of the M4A1 report. Now, a foreword before I get into the actual meat of this video. The M4A1 is the first of many guns with multiple ammo types, and I will be treating each of those ammo types as a separate gun, even though I will be consolidating them all into the report for the individual gun. I will simply be dividing them into sections. For example, for the M4A1, there will be 3 sections: a NATO section, which is what we're going to be starting with, the Parabellum section, and the SOCOM section. Each of these will be treated as completely different guns, and should an ammo type not have enough blueprints to it that allow me to make 3 separate videos on, I will consolidate all of the blueprints for that ammo type into one video, and then discuss in greater detail my experiments on how I arrived at my final builds for each of these ammo types. A second thing I would like to point out before we get into the actual point of this video, which is the recoil patterns of the M4A1, I would like to point out that most of the recoil pattern tests or examples that I show you here are specifically using the 60 round mag, so you can better understand how the recoil pattern on the M4A1 works. With that being said, we begin with the M4A1 stock except for extended mag, and you'll notice that it kicks pretty high up and to the right a little bit. It starts out fairly straightforward. It goes almost completely vertical for about 15-20 bullets, and then it starts kicking to the right, similarly to the Kilo kicking to the left and having no vertical recoil after 20-ish or so bullets. The difference here is that the M4A1, with its greater firing rate, does in fact kick up consistently and constantly where the Kilo stops. This is because the M4A1's difference from the Kilo is its firing rate. They use the exact same ammo, so they do the exact same damage per bullet. It's a matter of the M4A1 simply shooting faster that causes this consistent recoil to the up and right. This next test is the Grenadier barrel, and nothing else other than extended mags, so you can see that a single vertical recoil doesn't make a huge difference on the M4A1. And before I move on to having 3 attachments that control recoil and control vertical recoil, I am going to show you what it looks like with just the Commando foregrip, which provides a little bit of vertical recoil but mostly horizontal recoil. So you can see the effects of a classic horizontal recoil on the up and to the right nature of the firing, and you'll notice this very unusual recoil pattern where it's almost completely vertical up until almost the 30-ish clip part, and then it kicks off to the right, and then it keeps on going diagonally up and to the right. This means that in a regular 30-round clip, using the Commando foregrip, you are basically not going to see any rightwards kick. You will only receive rightwards kick with an extended mag and the Commando foregrip. This is something interesting to note, as this then becomes a question of, do I want the extra rounds in the M4A1 and have that rightwards kick at the end of the what would initially be the regular clip, or do I want to slap on the Commando foregrip, use sleight of hand, and pass over extended mags completely? It is a very significant choice in terms of the NATO magazine, and something that should be kept in mind when you are building your M4A1. With that being said, I will now demonstrate 3 recoil control attachments, all reducing vertical recoil for the M4A1, and this is where things also get fairly interesting, as it's not really got a whole lot of vertical recoil at this point, and it kind of does a miniature version of what the Commando foregrip does. So the Commando foregrip is definitely a potent attachment on this gun. It is actually fairly interesting to note that the entire recoil is diagonally up and to the right. There is no straight up vertical recoil here. So if you're really looking to capitalize on the M4A1's controllable recoil, it might be wise to not attach 3 recoil control attachments. 1 or 2 should be enough to get the M4A1 into about the recoil position you want, because attaching 3 removes your vertical recoil so much that it just becomes diagonally up and to the right in terms of recoil, which often is more difficult to deal with, especially in hardcore when you're not likely going to be firing off so many shots that you would necessarily even make it to the horizontal recoil of the M4A1's usual firing amount. For example, on the initial test with the Grenadier barrel and nothing else, it was straight up recoil for the first almost full clip. So in hardcore, where you almost never use up an entire clip in a single burst, because people die so fast there, you're never going to see that rightwards kick in hardcore, so it's generally not going to be worth attaching any kind of horizontal recoil on hardcore, nor are you going to want to attach any more than a single vertical recoil control attachment. With that being said, this is a default M4A1 with a scope in the between 3 and 4 times. I can't remember if it's 3.25 or 3.5, but you can see where it's quite a bit different from the initial tests, where it is pretty consistently up and to the right, and pretty strongly at that. Next, I demonstrate the sniper scope, which is a 4.4 times scope, and this doesn't really change a lot from the previous scope. It does go straight vertical, and then it sharply ticks to the right, and then it goes straight vertical again, which is fairly interesting because this means that for long-range engagements, the M4A1 actually has a brief period of time where it's completely vertical, so attaching 2 or so recoil control attachments in this situation with possibly a single aiming stability attachment will allow you to be very accurate with the M4A1 with the NATO rounds at long ranges, even with a sniper scope. So that's something else that is going to be kept in mind in future tests, and something that I'll be talking about more in future videos. It is a quite interesting facet. This is the M4A1 NATO rounds with a sniper scope and 3 aiming stability attachments. And this really demonstrates what I've been saying all along about how aiming stability simply decreases the or affects the recoil control, how scope wobble and aiming stability are really just revolving around recoil control, because you will notice that there is almost zero difference in the recoil pattern of this setup as opposed to the previous one, which only had the sniper scope and the extended mag. This has 3 attachments increasing aiming stability, and yet there is almost no difference in the recoil pattern. That is because aiming stability and scope wobble both revolve around the presence of recoil control, and if you have no attachments that provide recoil control, your aiming stability is not enhancing your actual accuracy. It has no recoil control benefits to really affect. So in that particular way, there is no actual reason to attach aiming stability attachments without at least 1 recoil control attachment, and I demonstrate this with this next example, as I'll put it, where I have a single vertical recoil attachment. The commando, well, I have the longer barrel for recoil control and aiming stability, recoil stabilization with the commando foregrip, and a pair of aiming stability attachments. Now I took off the extended mag here because I wanted the 2 aiming stability attachments for demonstration purposes, but you'll notice that went almost straight up and it wasn't really that extreme. Most of the clip actually went straight vertical. I will now demonstrate with only 1 aiming stability attachment and extended mags, which also turned out to be quite the interesting little experiment going on there. Now, if you observe this one, where there's only 1 aiming stability boost, you will notice that it isn't really a whole lot different from the previous test where it went straight up and then kicked to the right. It's a little bit stronger in terms of the recoil. You will notice that it kicked up a bit more before it started going to the right, but the rightwards kick wasn't quite as strong. So this is, well, technically this is 2 aiming stability attachments, since the commando foregrip provides aiming stability, and the previous one was 3, but you see how, for the M4A1 at the very least, recoil control is a little bit more important than aiming stability. I would argue for the optimal amount of recoil control on the M4A1, and this is something I'll be testing later, but my current hypothesis is that a single attachment doing aiming stability and a single recoil control and a single recoil stabilization will get you the kind of desirable recoil you need. In other words, basically the Commando foregrip, which I anticipate being one of the most useful attachments on the M4A1, as it was for the Kilo. However, unlike the Kilo, which could live quite well without it, it really looks like it is to the M4A1's extreme benefit to equip the Commando foregrip in any situation or any build that is not specifically being geared towards the close range. So this is something I'll be experimenting with alongside various blueprints as I go through this series, but it is something that I would like you to observe, dear viewer, as to something very interesting about the M4A1, especially considering the differences in recoil pattern to the Kilo 141. Now, with that being said, and now that I've gone through all of the M4A1's recoil patterns, the next video will be talking about blueprints for the M4A1 in the NATO rounds, whether or not these are going to be long range, or these are all just going to be a compilation of all of them, I'm not sure. I'm pretty confident that the NATO rounds have enough blueprints associated with them where I can quite safely make 3 separate parts. What I will also do as a forewarning to the second and third sections dealing with the other ammo types, if a blueprint has a spare slot and is not using extended mags, then I will probably, in order to at least test it with a different ammo type, swap that ammo type. I will clarify what blueprints were natively NATO rounds and which ones I converted to a different ammo type as I go through them. But that won't be something you'll have to worry about, or I'll have to worry about, for a little while yet. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, ignore me. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a great 24 hours.